Hey everyone, it's Greg with Spotted Tongue Woodworking. I just want to take a minute and talk about milling lumber. Right now, I'm in the middle of cabinet season. I have a couple of vanities, some built-ins, kitchen islands, a lot of things coming up. And the most important part of this is starting from the rough lumber for my face frames, for my doors, for my drawer fronts, for the drawers themselves. And milling the lumber, it's not hard, but there are very few specific things that I think make the difference between a good job and a bad job. The first part is, you know, is we both need to mill the wood as wide as you can, but also only as wide or as long as you need. So what I actually do a lot of the time is I cut my pieces to the rough lengths because I have my cut list for all the doors and the drawers and the drawer fronts. Cut them to the rough lengths, and if they're wider than the jointer, this is an 8-inch jointer, if the board is over 8 inches, I'm going to cut it down either in half or in thirds or however it needs to be to maximize the yield from the boards. And one of the things, there's a lot of things. And so a lot, with rough lumber, it's kiln dried and they control everything, it still twists, it still warps, it still moves and bends and curves in ways that are very tricky to get rid of. And the quickest way to flatten and to straighten a board really is to cut it. If I were to take this board, this was a 10-inch wide board, it was 8 feet long, and it had a massive cup like this. And if I were to, if I had theoretically a 12-inch joiner and I tried to joint that board all at once, to get that cup out, and I would start with a 10-inch board, I'd probably end up with a 6-inch wide board with not much of it actually being usable. So by cutting it to the length, because it also bowed this way, so cutting it to length, it straightens it out that way. Ripping it also flattens out this way, giving me more material to work from. So now, running the boards on the jointer, where I'm going to start is I'm going to joint one face, flip that, and joint one edge. And when jointing the faces, what you're looking for is, you can see, even though I've ripped this board down into a smaller piece, it still has a cup in it like this. And there's different ways of approaching it. What I like to do, I like to approach it, they call it crown side up. So the crown is the high point in the middle here, so the crown is pointing up. And what I can do is on the jointer, having those two edges on there, I know that the board is always going to be flat when I push it, or as flat as can be when I push it down on there. If I were to go crown side down, what's going to happen is it can rock on that crown. And what it's going to do is it might not consistently go every time. So when I'm looking for my boards, looking to start the milling, I'm looking to start crown side up. After jointing that one edge, I'm going to then look down the board and see which way that it bends. Because, again, I'm going to flip the board around and I'm going to go again, try to go crown side up. So that means it'll joint this edge, joint that edge, and it'll take the edges down until the middle is level with those edges, and I can joint all the way across. If you go the other way around and you start with crown side down in the middle, you actually have to balance the board and run it and hit the middle before you can start working your way out to the edges. Because if you were to take a board that was U-shaped like this and try to run it through the planer like that, what's going to happen is it's just going to keep going at an angle like that, and you're going to lose usable material up at that front edge of your board. So here's what we'll do. I'm going to go through, I'm going to joint one edge and joint one face on all these parts from my doors and drawer fronts, and from there we'll move on to the planer. So you can see as I was going, now I have a perfectly flat face and a perfectly flat edge. So it is face jointed and it is edge jointed. And this face and this edge are now at 90 degrees from each other. And we call these your reference faces. So now when I move on to the planer, what's going to happen is I will start with my flat reference face facing down. And what that's going to do is that flat reference face will run along the bottom of the planer, and the planer will then mimic that on the top, making this top part parallel with this bottom face. If I were just to run a crooked, wavy board through the joiner, what's going to happen is the board will get thinner through the planer. The board will get thinner, but the board will come out wavy and potato chippy and cupped and bowed, the same as it came in, just thinner. So by creating this reference face, I now know when I run it through the planer, I'm going to have the same parallel face on the top. So after jointing the boards, jointing one face and jointing one edge, so I have these two 90-degree reference faces, we're going to go on over to the planer. And the planer, like I said, all the planer does is it makes thinner and it makes parallel. It doesn't make flat unless you use a planer sled or a jointing sled, which you can use for a wider board that doesn't fit on your joiner. If you want to keep it at that same width, you can put a sled with shims and all that that holds a board flat to create that reference face, which you can flip over and then run through the planer. But for your standard milling process, you need to joint the boards first. Jointing is the first step. You need a reference face to work off of when going to the planer. But here with the planer, what we're going to do is we're going to run all the boards through, and I'm not going to take them all the way down to my final thickness. I'm going to leave them, a little heavy. Basically, I'm just going to run these through until it's mostly a parallel, clean face, and I'm going to sticker them, stack them, and leave all these boards overnight and come back tomorrow and finish jointing and planing them. Repeat the process, because whenever you remove wood, whether you joint it, plane it, cut it, you are revealing stresses in the board, uncovering stresses in the board. They are kiln dried, they are frozen in place. So if the board, kind of wants to go, it wants to twist, it wants to warp, whatever, in the position where it's in with the amount of wood on there, it is frozen in place. You remove those top layers of wood on the top and the bottom. What you're going to do is you're going to uncover more of those stresses. You're going to release the stress, and it's going to move again. So what I'm going to do, plane these down part of the way to my final thickness, let them sticker them, let them stack them overnight, come back tomorrow and finish the whole milling process. And that will leave me with straighter, flatter lumber than if I had gone through the whole milling and the jointing and planing process, the whole milling process in one day. And there it is. That is one board. It's only S3S because I haven't ripped down this final edge yet, because I'm not going to be finished milling these until tomorrow. So we jointed the edge, jointed the face, jointed the edge, we planed the face. I flip it back over just to clean up that jointed face. And what we'll do is I'll finish up the rest of these. I'll sticker them, I'll stack them, I'll let them sit till tomorrow, let them move, release any tension that's in there right now, and we'll finish up the milling process, bringing them down to just over 3/4 for all of my doors and drawer fronts. So when I say stacked and stickered, I mean the wood is stacked, and these are called stickers. They're just sticks that go between the pieces of wood. What this does is this allows airflow all around the wood. And what that does, allows airflow all around the wood, so any extra moisture content that might have been in the middle of the boards, anything that would have been uneven, unequal, imbalanced, it's going to get evened out. And having them stickered, having them like this, is the stress of the boards on top of each other is going to help keep it straight as the wood acclimates to this new normal. and we'll just let this sit overnight, come back tomorrow. These boards will probably be a little warped, a little bowed, and I'll hit them with the jointer one more time and then run them through the planer, bring them down to my final thickness, and then start cutting them into my 2 1/4 pieces for all my rails and stiles for my doors and drawer fronts. All right, so we're back. We're back the next day. You know, I've let these sit overnight, you know, roughly 18 hours or so. And we're going to take these out of the sticker, you know, we're going to unstack these, take them off, and we're just going to take a minute and just see, you know, how much these move. You see that this board, it did bow a little bit up and down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all the boards as I take them off. I'm going to check them and see which way they may have moved, and from there, stack them crown side up to hit them on the jointer real quick. Yeah, just take a little bit, take them on the jointer real quick, and then we'll bring them down to the final thickness in the planer. Here we are, we've jointed, we've planed, we've stickered, stacked, let the pieces acclimate. We ran through the joiner again, establishing that flat base all over again now that after we release some of the internal stress. And now I'm going to bring these boards down to their final thickness. We're going to go somewhere between 7/8 and 3/4. 3/4 is going to be about the final after all running them through the drum sander after these doors are assembled. I'm going to leave them a little thick, leave them a little heavy to have that meat to take off and to make sure that these doors, when they're assembled, are fully flat. So here we go. So real quick, before I get too much further into planing these boards down, I ran this board through, and I don't know if you can quite see the detail on what's going on here, but there is a lot of tear out. There's a lot of chatter. There's a lot of chunks missing out of the wood. Part of the problem is because the planer does have dull knives. We're working on replacing them. We need a wrench that fits in where the blades are. But part of it is also I did not pay attention to the grain direction on the edge of the board. If you can see, if I would hold this board flat, and if you could see the grain, you can see that it runs like this. It runs at an angle down the board. And there are two directions that I could run it in this way, or I could run it in that way. And that changes the angle that the board has. So if I were to run it, this way with these pieces facing up like this, as the rotating planer blades come, they're going to catch, and it's going to pull those and chip those wood fibers out. This is, the harder the wood, the more likely it is going to tear out, especially with a dull blade. So what I need to do is, instead of running it this way, instead of running it uphill, I need to flip the board around that way and run it downhill, so that instead of it catching those wood fibers that are facing this way, the wood fibers are now at an angle that way, and it's going to cut it rather than chip it, if you understand what I'm saying. So I'm going to be running it downhill rather than running it uphill. A lot of newer planers, a lot of newer jointers come with, or you can upgrade them to a helical style head. It's a spiral cutter head with indexed carbide cutters that you can rotate and won't really ever go sharp. What that's going to do is that's going to cut at an angle across the grain, and what that'll do is that will reduce the tear out. You'll have almost zero tear out regardless of which way you run the board through the planer. It's really nice for figured woods, for curly woods, bird's eye, whatever. You can run it through a helix head and it's not going to have any issues. The normal straight knife planer, you really do have to pay attention to which way that grain is running, especially as you come down towards your final passes with the thickness planer. If this was some of my final passes, I'd be really upset because it's going to take a lot of sanding to get that tear out of it. So let's keep going. And there you have it. Here we go. We have nice, flat, square, still S3S because I haven't gone through the table saw. But this is my process for prepping lumber for final dimensioning, for final widths, final lengths, is to get everything as flat and straight as you possibly can. And from there, take it to the table saw. I'll start cutting out my widths, and then I'll cut to my lengths, and I'll start assembling my, cut my dados, cut my rails, cut my stiles, and cut out all my door and drawer front parts. So we'll see my final dimensions, bring out the calipers, and we are at, 0. See where that brings us. Somewhere in the middle of the board, just in case there's any snipe. And we are at 13/16. 13/16 for our final thickness. Yep, nice and consistent across the boards. That gives me a little bit of meat to work on, so hair over 3/4, just what I wanted. And by the time all is said and done, we'll be right about at that 3/4, right about that 3/4 mark. So S3S, not S4S yet, S3S lumber, ready to be made, ready to be worked with. What more could I want?